I'm Bethany.
And I'm Lauren.
Welcome to the Healing Collective podcast, where we explore the paradox of healing at the individual and the collective level.
Join us as we invite guests to share their personal paths to freedom. So often when we ask this question about people's identity, they talk about, not necessarily on the pod, but just in general, right? Like, who are you? It's like, oh, here's my role, or here's what I do in the world. Mm-hmm. And I would love for you to just kind of tell our listeners who you are from a more holistic place, like definitely your role, but just like, who would they really know you to be if they really knew you?
Yeah. I think when I think about who I am, or when I think about who I am and also the best version of me, I would say that number one, I feel like I'm a great friend. And whether that's with my partner or with my actual friends or with, I'm learning to figure out what that means for my teenage kids. I think right now I just want it to mean someone that they can talk to about anything. And I'm sure that will evolve or maybe stay the same. I am someone who is Christian. I love God. And I try to model that through not just worship, but also through service. And which is very important to me, the work that I do in different communities around Chicago. It really gives me a greater sense of purpose. I feel less attached for the first time in my life to my professional identity. So I probably wouldn't even brought it up. I'm a father, which is important to me. As I get older, just being more aware of my actions and how I'm being the best father that I can for my kids and for myself. Those are some of the identities I feel like that I'm most identified with. Besides, I think the number one would be being a Black man, because, and although that's very surface in terms of like, that's what you see, it does influence how other people perceive me, but also how I move through the world, the decisions that I make, where I decide to live, how I respond to certain decisions, etc.
Do you have a sense of like why you exist, or like a personal mission that drives you in terms of the work you do in the world? You know, these kind of, even the extracurriculars, the boards you choose to be on, or things like that?
Right now, and I felt this for a long time, I think, since I was maybe fifth grade is my earliest memory, is that my purpose is to be an advocate for kids who cannot advocate for themselves. And that means a lot of different things. And I chose education as one of those ways that I was advocating for kids, in terms of making sure that they were experiencing the best education that I could offer them, or that I could support others to offer. Now that has expanded to other areas of one's life. I think I'm thinking of it more holistically.
Right, because you probably, like me, figured out like, oh, adults are what impact kids the most.
Right.
So
right.
I need
Exactly.
to impact more adults. Yeah.
Right.
Bethany, any questions around that?
Yeah, well, this podcast is called The Healing Collective, and I love thinking, I've been wanting to maybe have somebody on just to talk about parenting, because I love thinking about healing as a modality, as like an intergenerational piece of work and opportunity, I guess. So I'd love to hear you talk more about your kids and just what you, I mean, we talk on this podcast called the Healing Collective Podcast. We talk about the paradox of healing, meaning that everyone's perfect and whole and doesn't really need to heal anything in one sense, and that everyone can use a little help too, and that we all have things that we're kind of like moving through and learning about and struggling with and recovering from. So a little bit about what your relationship is to all of that, and if you're willing, specifically through the framing of fatherhood.
Yes. So I think my journey there has been around obviously being impacted by my grandfather and my father, who both are have a lot of strengths, and I'm proud of both of them. But they also carried a lot of trauma or carry, and so my journey has been really being crystal clear about what I'm receiving from them, both that is healthy and that's also trauma, and filtering it out. What do I want to keep and replicate with my kids? And what do I want to say that's not serving me? That did not serve me, that's not going to serve me, and that's not going to serve my kids. And that has been a long process. I think my first experience with that is around being emotionally available. Like my dad was always there, and I feel like I never questioned if my dad loved me, but I don't necessarily feel like my dad was emotionally available. Like he doesn't know how to do that. Like he just doesn't know how to do it. I don't think my grandfather knows how to do it either. They show love through their ability to provide, give you life choices or options. Those are ways that they show love. And one of my kids that works for, and one of my kids requires me to be like, she needs me to be like connected to her emotionally. And if I'm not, then we do this. Mm-hmm. And so, and that's actually since she was born, I just didn't realize it because she was also a very like needy infant. And I'm like, damn. And now it still has shown up in the same way. Like she requires a lot of emotional energy, and that there's no judgment around that. It just is what it is. And I didn't necessarily know how to do that because that wasn't something that was modeled for me. And that's one thing I think that's been the biggest lesson. And so from that, I had to really figure out why, beyond my father and my grandfather, that's a piece of the story, but what other things in my life are preventing me from being as emotionally available to my kids. Because I always say like, I want to be their first boyfriend. Like I want them to learn what it's like for a man to love them from me. So it's important that I do the work of like modeling that, because I don't want them to end up with a guy like me. Like I'm just playing, but a guy who's not emotionally available, right? And that may have negative consequences based on who they are and how they're able to work through that.
When you think about the man that you would want them to be attracted to and how you would want him to treat them, what comes to mind?
I would want them to be attracted to someone that has like values that they value. Like I don't necessarily want to say list them, because that's like, that would be me, right? But something that they think, like if they want someone who's adventurous, if they want someone, obviously there's some core pieces that I think are important in terms of like integrity and, but Beyond that, I just feel like it should align to whatever they feel like they value and they need. I definitely would want them to be attracted to someone who is able to have, like, who has a vision for something, like, and has skills or potential that will allow them to support themselves. Like, it may not be fully formed, but like they have it in them. Because yeah.
When I look at you, it's like you feel so open to me. Like your face is like bright and your whole energy is so wide open. Like it's just so warm. Like I can feel you. And I have two questions, I guess, or maybe like a reflection, I guess, and a question, but it feels so good over here. My dad did what he could, and he was not super available emotionally, I would say, and maybe wasn't as intentional around what you're creating with your daughters and like showing them what it feels like to be loved and held by like a masculine energy, you know. I think he did everything he could, and I experienced that however I experienced it. But it is undeniable, the influence of your father on you. Like it's undeniable. And so,
or the lack of influence, like the gaps when the influence,
the gaps, or
yeah,
the unmet needs, or whatever it is. It's just, you know, we're looking at our dads to be like, how do people see us? How do men see us? And then that really becomes a huge part of our identity and how we interact on that level. So I just want to say what you're doing, the way you're holding this is beautiful, and it's opening me up over here even, and melting me a little bit. And one of the things you said was thinking about the men in your life, your grandfather, father, and what served you and what didn't, and sort of like making different choices. And on one level, that's so simple, right? Like, this didn't work well, I'm not going to do that. And on another level, we get so trapped in patterning. It's so hard. I mean, I'm in there, I've done all this work, all this liberatory work, and I still meet with my therapist, and I'll be like talking about what's happening in my relationship. And she's like, does that remind you of your dad? And I'm like, oh, like it's everywhere, and I keep not even seeing it. So what is your roadmap? How are you discerning? What are you paying attention to? How are you differentiating and even noticing where the influence comes and what happens for you and what's of service and what's not? Because it's like, it sounds simple. And also I think it's just way easier said than done. And it's a place where we have some of the deepest unconscious patterning. So.
Yes. I think that they're great teachers, and Lauren has met them. They're super clear, and they communicate very effectively. So what I find is that if there's an area where there is some like distress or something's off, they'll bring it to me. But so that's one thing, which is really important, right? That they feel heard, that they feel seen. And, you know, some of it is important and some of it is just them being teenagers, or, you know, an 8-year-old. The other piece, though,
and you've created them knowing that they can bring things to you, which already is something.
And that's ongoing work. Yes. And then the second piece is around just emotions in general. I don't remember talking about feelings at all. I don't like any emotions really. I remember laughter, but in terms of like difficult things, difficult emotions. Also, I do not remember having any difficult conversations with my parents. Like, they don't have them. Like, they don't create space for them. And So that's the second, or maybe connected to the first. And then the second is around sharing your truth. I think in my family, things are hidden, and well, I know things are hidden. We don't talk about them. And I don't want to create a family where things happen to people, or something happens and we don't tackle it head on.
Mm.
So like a really like, I can give two examples. One is like, last summer, one of my kids ran over another one of my kids with a golf cart and broke both of her legs. So one of the 13-year-olds ran over the 8-year-old with the golf cart, broke both of her legs. She was in the hospital for 8 weeks. It was very traumatic. It was during COVID. Only one parent could go up at a time. The whole thing, right? And I feel like we had two choices. Either we were going to, in terms of healing, and maybe more. I mean, I'm not like this isn't my expertise, but we are going to let time take its course. And we're going to just come back, and we're going to just pick it up like normal and push through. Like we're just going to, be back together again. Or we're going to attend to each person in this family and what they need emotionally, physically, to feel safe, to feel valued, to feel heard. And that might look different for every person. And we chose the second. That means that we did therapy for everybody, group therapy, single, individual therapy. We did everything we could to make sure that we were prioritizing their mental health, and that we were modeling when something happens hard in a family, you do the work to repair it. Like we all do the work. That shit just doesn't come back together like magically. No, we have to do some things together. And that was something that I don't think I've ever experienced in my childhood, that I was happy to be a part of as a parent.
Yeah. It's like
What
opening to the conflict, allowing the conflict and being with each other through it, and attuning, not just like trying to get away from it and get past it and get it
right.
Get over it. Yeah.
What were you going to say, Lauren?
I was just curious, like what you learned navigating that healing with them.
I think I learned, and this sounds really intense, but it was a great example because I never felt this before in terms of this intense emotion as a parent, because the child that ran over the other child, I was so disappointed. Mm-hmm. And then I felt so bad for the other kid. But I think what I learned or experienced is like what unconditional love looks like for your kids. And it wasn't that I was pleased with her decisions, but I was willing to like model what it looks like to love someone through a difficult situation in a way, to me, that was healthy. So like I wasn't like yelling and screaming at her and like trying to cause all this trauma. My fear with that was like, I'm like, if we don't do this right, like we're gonna have a kid, an adult who never has let this go. Mm-hmm. Who years
or
later,
like relationships with two daughters who never have a relationship. Mm-hmm.
And they always felt, ever since I was 8, I felt like you blah blah blah.
So yeah.
But that's real.
Right. And so many of us have that. Right.
Right. And so for me, it was like showing emotion and being really clear, like I'm really upset. I'm pissed. This is tough. But and then also like the reflecting piece, like what did you learn from this? So it was difficult. And it was even more difficult because of my family dynamics and my family structure that made it like even more challenging. But I feel like that was the biggest lesson for me.
Yeah, I mean, it would be really hard to not. I mean, for me, it might be, I think it would show up less anger as more as like blame and more as like really like this is the victim. Like we need to give all the energy to the victim. And, you know, this comes up so much in restorative practice is that like everyone's a victim, you know, and usually people who perpetuate harm are victims of harm themselves. And how do we hold people like that versus creating a villain and a victim in scenarios of harm?
That's so true. Yeah.
I'm thinking about too, like, I feel like I gotta say this to people listening and Bethany, like, Stefan is not a soft parent either. Like me and Bethany have the mutual growth area of parents of always like leaning on the sides of less boundaries rather than more boundaries. When I tell you this man is like, they got their chores, they do their chores every single day. The house is immaculate. Like they know exactly what they do and they don't do. These conversations, you know, he's like the best teachers I've ever had who can just be like kind of emotionally constant in all these different situations. Like that's Stefan. And so I've always
that's
thought
the kind
about,
of
like,
teacher you were though.
I know I can do as a teacher, you know, it's a whole different thing for me as a parent, but you know, that thank God I was a teacher because I would have never survived parenting without that. But, you know, I'm thinking about this idea of like, my therapist used to say, you learn how lovable you are from your mom and how worthy you are from your father. And this balance of sometimes as a single parent, I have made up the story. And when I say single, I co-parent. But if it's just me in the house and it's Monday through Friday and we're dealing with school and you gotten in trouble in school and what you need to eat and what you need, you know, it's like this edge of like, for a long time, I was his principal. I was his disciplinarian. Like it was. So then when I wanted to be nurturing, it was like, whoa, you know? And so I'm just saying all that to say, like, how do you balance for yourself, like the boundaries and holding that while also them feeling like I can come to you with these difficult things and you're going to be available for that.
Yeah. I don't know that I've mastered that. I don't know that I have that down all the way. I think it's going to happen soon though, because they're rolling into teenage years and there's going to be some, you know, they're going to test some boundaries and they're going to, you know, what it's like to be a teenager. So, but I don't know that I have mastered that piece. You know, I think the closest I've come to that is saying, you know, if there's something you need to tell me, you know, I will create space and you don't have to worry about the consequences. And yeah.
And do you think they believe you? Like that there, you know, there won't be consequences?
I think so, because I think I'm really clear about like what's a non-negotiable for me. And the non-negotiables are school, like excelling in school, being respectful. I mean, obviously there's a lot under both of those, but and then having integrity, I think maybe is the third one or something like that. Like, and then, so what? So like one of my kids came to me and told me she was questioning her sexuality. She actually told me she made a decision. And I was like, okay, awesome. So how are you feeling about that? Like, I knew I threw her off. I knew she was like, wait, what? Or maybe she didn't. I don't know, but she was
gearing up for like a fight or something. Like,
no, she wasn't, but she was just like, so that's it. Like, I'm like, yeah, that's it. Like,
right. This ain't no big thing, really. This is like,
right. I mean,
right.
right. I'm like, but I did tell her, I gave her some advice on what I thought. And then, So I'm trying to figure that out. But if it's one of those three things that I just talked about, I'm not balancing shit.
Yeah, I think it is an art form. I think there's like a balance. So like when you have a partner, you know, and we used to do this kind of like as principles, like a good cop, bad cop situation. Like one of the principles is like the soft, like, let's talk about this. And then you bring in somebody else who's like it's kind of like, I think there's always got to be one or the other. And I think it can get confusing when, you know, that either it's too nurturing, it's so nurturing that the boundaries aren't there, or the boundaries are there and the nurturing is not necessarily there.
Yeah, they know I always say this, and this is, I'm not your friend. I'm your parent.
Okay, I've heard.
But you just said you're working on your friendship with your kids right at the get-go too.
And I said, I'm trying to figure out what that means.
Yeah.
So it's like, and I think what I should say is I'm trying to figure out how to be the parent, like what parenthood looks like for me. And I think an aspect of that is someone who you can trust. And I think that's what I'm going with for friends. But I don't necessarily want to be someone who you you know, it makes me think like maybe clarifying what that definition of friendship.
Yeah.
But I think the piece of friendship that kind of makes me lean off of it in terms of my kids is like, I don't necessarily see my kids and I on the same playing field.
Right. That's what I was going to talk about is like, I have this big question, like, can we really be in relationship across anything if there's a power dynamic? And like in true equitable relationship, and should our relationships with our children be any different than, like, I just have this big question about power that I can see in all these different areas.
So maybe it shifts when that power dynamic is lessened or removed. Like I could be my dad's friend. Like you don't have my dad. There's no. I mean, I don't necessarily know what the power dynamic is. There is a sense of like, I want to make him proud, or I want him. Yeah, that's the biggest sense. Like I want my dad to be proud of me, but I'm not afraid of him. I'm not, you know what I mean? So maybe the relationship can shift, but yeah, that's interesting.
Also, I think when we're pointing to friendship, like there's something, I don't remember where I got this, but like when my kids are upset about something and sort of wanting to talk to me about something, sometimes I'll just straight up ask them, like, do you want me to listen to you and just like hear you? Do you just want to be heard? Do you want guidance and advice? You know, like what, and they usually know, even young, like Parker's 6 years old and he knows what he needs or what he wants sometimes. And so, or like, do you want me to be your parent? You know, do you want me to protect you or do something, you know, take an action? It's like, I kind of lay out some options for them. And I think friendship probably feels more, and also your girls are older. And so it's like, or your kids are older, my kids are a little younger, and I can feel that it's, you know, it's more guidance and it's more of this other thing. But especially as my older boy, Finn, he's 9, sometimes he wants it to hang, you know, he just wants to kind of be different parts of himself with me and like see how that all bounces off and back to him and stuff and get feedback. And so I think there's probably just a thing of whatever we're pointing to with friendship, it's a support and connection. And it's like different flavors of it. And when it comes down to it, all these different roles are support and connection, just with like different strategies almost. So
yeah, that resonates with me because hell, I do that with my friends. Like, do you want me to listen?
Yeah.
Do you want some advice? I might have just did that with Lauren. Like, I don't think I'm in advice mode right now. I think you just want me to listen. Like that is important even in friendships.
Yeah.
but or relationship or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to bring something up. It's a little tangential, but I'm trusting it because it's just
Okay.
it's so interesting that we're having this conversation about our children, but specifically the masculine, the role of the masculine with children, because I've been having so much stuff come up around my dad and all these ways that like the biggest one recently was this really feeling this very tender young place that's like always felt like an inconvenience to him. And sometimes I do these kind of like reparative healing, like replacing that memory with another memory. And I couldn't access examples in it that were like somatic, that weren't just thoughts of like what it felt like to not be an inconvenience to a man.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even have enough experiences of being, and then because I had to think about like what would be the opposite of that. And I finally came to one of my male friends who has daughters who like in high school, and he like gets up every morning and makes them breakfast, and I could just see how he like makes his whole schedule around everything that they're up to in the world. And there's a way that even financially they don't have to worry about finances, because it also came up with money and me recognizing like I don't ever believe I'm going to have enough, or that I'm going to have more than enough. And I always feel like I have to fight for it. And just this like protection that I realized that when girls grow up with dads who really ensure that their needs are met. And I know there's all these gender things around what I'm saying, and I haven't fully teased all that out, but they're just, I could feel when I felt into these girls that like, because they knew that the resources were there, they could just take for granted in life that they were always going to have the resources that they needed, that they were always going to be supported, and how you create a different life when you can just take those types of things for granted, or you take for granted that the masculine would want to spend time with you and want to kind of cater to your needs. And so I don't know, that's just like this idea of I'm really healing. I'm recognizing how much I've had a negative relationship to the masculine, and also how I've had this perception that masculine doesn't exist, versus realizing what didn't really exist for me as a vision. It doesn't mean those men don't exist, but I haven't been experiencing men that way because it doesn't exist in me. And even like, what does that mean about my own inner masculine and feminine? And like, right, I know I'm going really deep, but it's really helpful to process this. Is like, I've been seeing how much I have toxic masculinity programmed into me, and how that impacts my own internal feminine, and how like the high masculine or the divine masculine is something different than that. And what would it feel like in my body to feel both of those energies, as if I would feel it in a home with a female and a male parent that were holding both of those things. And I'm like obsessed with Stefan and his partner. One, and I know you're not perfect, like we all know, but it looks perfect.
That's a lie. That is a lie.
They are an Instagram family. Let me just say that they are like an Instagram family. But I do believe, Stefan, like as much as you have to grow, like in your house, I can feel the balance of that masculine and feminine energetically between the two of you. And I'm just really recognizing like how even being around the essence of that balance, it gives you a vision of possibilities that you're going to keep recreate, that your girls will likely keep recreating.
Yes. That's interesting. You said some things that make me like that trigger something in me that's kind of connected, not really, but like when it comes to my personal life, and we both had kids kind of young, like most of my friends don't have kids, or they're just starting but most of them don't.
We had kids young and we weren't expecting to have kids.
Right.
At that time.
Thank God we were like set up to be able to do it. But what I was gonna say is sometimes I worry about this piece that I'm gonna talk about is like, so now I'm 37, like I like to go out, I like to travel, I like to hang out. Like an example is like, I'm in a male book club, and then after the book club, the guys came over and we smoked cigars and like drank whiskey. And, you know, I even felt a little guilty about that, like seeing my kid, like, because my kids saw it, you know, and then, but yeah, no problem. But but I also want to model for them like balance.
Yeah.
And I see some of my friends or colleagues that are parents that make parenting look like painful. You know what I mean? Like their kid, they don't want their kid to ever feel like they are not attending to their every need. And so to me, it's like a balance of that.
I did a lot of that stuff for a long time. I was just doing like ultimate attachment parenting, on demand breastfeeding for years, didn't sleep through the night for 5 years, paid to bring my kid on every business trip I went on with like a nanny that I couldn't afford, and went into like tens of thousands of dollars of debt because I didn't want to like separate from them too early. Like, I went like way over on that side. And I went the other way.
You modeled convenience. You were there, right? So it's like,
and then I got divorced, and now they're just not even with me half of the week. And hope I got some like points in the bank around like showing up, because
it all
like,
worked out.
Well, yeah. And I learned so much about my own boundaries and myself, and what it feels like when I'm empty and I need my resources, and how I flipped a lot of stories I had about like, well, that's what's good for them, so I'm going to do it, not recognizing that what's good for me is also what's good for them. So I learned a shit ton. I just did it this really hard, intense way, which is just kind of how I do stuff. So no surprise.
So
there.
This is what I found is the solution, or this is what has worked for me, is that because I worry about what you're talking about, that my kids will perceive what everything I just described as them not being priority, or me, you know, like Friday nights, that should be, you know, in the house watching Nickelodeon. Like, I'm like, no, I'm about to go. You know what I mean? But what I do is I clearly communicate to them, or ask them, where do they want me to show up? Like, where is it your, like, well, I will say, I plan to be at your game. I plan to do this, and I plan to do this. Is there anything else that you're thinking like, okay, and this is the daddy-daughter date that we're going to have this week, or this is, and I do that with each of them separately and all together, so they get one-on-one time. And I clearly articulate to them that this is how I'm trying to prioritize my time with them. I hope it works.
Well, I want to stamp something else I hear that you do, and it's also connecting to something else you said, like when you talk about the daughter who's more sensitive, and the daughter, and I know I've heard you talk about all three in different ways. There's also this piece that Bethany and I have been talking about, is like you attune to specifically what they need. So you're not just asking them to tell you what their needs are, which I think is amazing, and also can be like, for kids, sometimes they need us to just attune to what it is, right, they need. And I think it would be imbalanced if you were just telling them or just asking them or whatever, you know?
Right.
But you're also like, okay, I actually know like this daughter really needs emotional time to process emotions when we're together, or physical touch. And this daughter really needs, she's playful and she wants to do fun things, you know? So I just want to stamp that. Yeah. Well, I know, Stefan, you kind of like prepared for this time a little bit, and you had some stuff. You said you took some notes and that you were thinking about.
Yeah, I did, but I don't need, they're not applicable. I mean, they are, but they're not. So we don't have to,
Well, I just know that I would say my story, my perception is that you're going through this couple years is like a new level of healing process.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'm having you repeat it back to me. So, keep going. I'm going through a new level.
Feeling all year. I feel you over
I
here.
agree
I'm just
with
feeling
you.
that. Yeah. And I just want to know what you're learning about healing now at 37.
Mm. Yes. I feel like I think it connects to what we've been talking about, but in order for me to be the best dad, the best partner, the best friend, I have to put in the work to be my best self. And for a long time, I have not done that in a way that was healing. I think what I did was suppress. And part of what I think you're seeing is when someone I love, a therapist that I love, says like a homecoming. Like I'm coming home to myself. And I feel and when that happens, then you show up in the world that way. Like, right? People can't help but see it. And that I feel like is the difference.
And what does that homecoming feel like? Like, help us experience some of what that experience has been like for you.
For me, my homecoming has felt like releasing shame. It has felt like telling the truth. There's a quote that I love that talks about just telling the truth to yourself and what that feels like. And the last one I would say is like listening to my body.
When you listen to your body, what's it look like? I mean, this has been my path the last year or so. I actually was just having a conversation with an old friend and thinking about, I brought up this conversation that we had almost 20 years ago. And I remember being terrified to say some words to this person of what was true for me. And it's like, I can feel it now. I felt like my chest was like breaking open. It felt like painful to like be that terrified and be seen or something like that. And I've just been, I'm a type 8 on the Enneagram, and I've had like this whole path around not wanting to feel my feelings for most of my life. And then starting to really start to get most of my data from my body and flipping it. And it's like a lot of somatic therapy and like a lot of stuff has come into me, flipping the script on myself that way, doing something really different strategies. But when you say that, I'm all ears, because I'm in a deep exploration around like the idea that maybe I know everything, maybe my body knows everything, and that I just don't listen often and convince myself I don't know things. So
I think that's true. So
how well can I attune to myself and my own body and my sensations and what happens and discern, use that to help me discern. What's your practice?
Yeah, I think I am no expert, but what my hunch is that whatever that it's connected to whatever your trauma is, right? So like for me, the reason why my body is important, and I would probably think this is for everybody because of all the reasons that we just shared, is because as a child, I suffered a lot sexual violence repeatedly. And so the what's important here is that I'm able to reclaim my body.
Yeah.
And actually feel in a space, the space being my body, where I was often numb and for survival, right?
Yeah.
And so emotionally, physically. And so that is why for me, attending to my body is so powerful.
I just want to pause a second because, you know, I love you so much. Like, I didn't know that. And I just want to honor, like, I believe you've done tons of work around it. I'm sure, you know, we all have our thing, like, oh, I had a victim of sexual violence, but it's like I can really imagine like my friend being hurt like that.
Thank you.
I'm really sad.
I feel a great deal of sadness too. And I feel it for the 5, 6, and 7-year-old Stefan.
Mm-hmm.
And any kid who, or anyone, but specifically a kid in my situation, that has to endure that. So, yeah. And I would say, you know, for a long time, I would not attach any emotion to it. Or I would not remember.
Effective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Strategy, a really friendly strategy.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah. I just think, and I think, you know, it is really mind blowing. Like, I don't know that I could think really of one friend that hasn't had this history to a certain extent.
Mm-mm.
And to be
Are you
real,
serious?
Yeah. And all the Black men that I love in my life have had that experience.
More people than not that I know. I didn't have that, but I'm like one of the only people I know that I'm really close to.
My computer's gonna die, so I gotta hold on 1 second. Pause.
And pause.
Thank you for being such an example of like feeling.
I'm so grateful I can access that. I just know how long, and for so long, I wouldn't have been able to access that, you know, and I feel so grateful.
I feel like when you spend all that time in the dark place, it's just upping your availability to like be in flow with all the stuff that comes through.
Okay. Sorry, y'all.
Let me just finish this one thought, because I think we'll probably keep this, but kind of like what Stefan is saying about having that grief for that 5, 6, and 7-year-old. Like, when I go into my dark place, like, it allows me to start accept feeling, right? The grief or the pain that I couldn't feel at the time the thing happened. And to your point, Stefan, you were talking about like being numb for so long or repressing for so long, right? And there's some intelligence of that in our nervous system, right? Because it's like you're not ready, it's not safe, you would unravel. But at the same time, there's also, once we do start to get aware of fear, like, it will kill me to go back and look at that. It will kill me to feel that way. It actually, in my body, often feels like it will kill me when I do. But when I create space for it and I feel the pain in the adult, more healed body that I am now, it allows me then to like when, like in this moment, when you were expressing your pain around your abuse, it's like I can find that in me. I have space for that in me because I went into those things that I thought would kill me, even that were about me, if that makes sense.
That's what started when I started somatic. I thought I was going to die. I thought it felt so big. I felt like if I had to feel through this whole lifetime of feelings, I hadn't felt it felt like I would die. I felt like I might explode or something. Like it felt so intense, and it wasn't. I started doing a little bit, and it was actually really effective, efficient work. And but I think I know what you mean, Lauren. I feel like I have like a little bit of a different certain experience around feelings and stuff, but like I know what it feels like to be overwhelmed by the sensations in your body, I guess, and choose to be like, no, thanks. And to just do that strategy for a long time. And I think people can do that. People can do that forever and like be okay. And I think there's a whole lot more capacity if we're able to slowly edge in on all that stuff and give it its space and let it be there and let it complete or let it get felt. But only if you're really well supported to be able to do that, I think.
To think back to your question, I think I want to answer your question explicitly. And your question was like, what do you do? It was like, how do you take awareness of your body? Was that your question?
Yeah. How do you, when you're like, you're citing like pain, like listening to your body as one of your main guides. So I'm like, what's that look like? What's the practice?
There's a couple things they're very new for me. And I think this is also what Lauren has said that she's experienced and or witnessed. And the first one for me is around rest and this busyness. And I realized for a long time that I would fill my life to capacity so that I did not have to process.
Feel your life.
You said what?
Yeah, I think we fill it to the brim so we don't have to feel our life.
Yeah, so exactly.
We just have to do our life.
Correct. And so now I'm very conscious to rest. I probably have never stayed in the bed all day until I was like 37.
I stayed in bed today till 11 and it felt really good.
But like, that just isn't something that I would even think would be imaginable. Like,
And if I think about that video of your grandfather, so Stefan's grandfather is like this larger than life person in Grand Rapids, right? And he was featured on this Black History Month feature. So I got to like watch and learn about him in this clip. And I just make up like there was no privilege. Like the difference between us and as him as an example, right? For him to make it and move through the world, like he wouldn't have been able to survive had he been taking time for his feelings and his naps. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and your life is so built on that survival and that sacrifice. And ironically, it's also what's keeping us in our generation, and especially, if you identify as Black, there's so many more complexities to that. So like, ironically, now we won't thrive if we continue that way of being that they passed down, and that fear, the fear that drove that.
Bingo. And part of liberation for me is saying, I'm tired and I'm going to give my body what it needs to restore. I don't need to push through this moment. That it'll be okay. Like whatever it is, it will be okay. As opposed to that scarcity. Right. And you talked a little bit about that too, like that. And I try to move my thinking to a place of abundance as opposed to scarcity. I have everything that I need to be successful. There is no need to fill my day to the brim where I can't use the restroom. or eat,
Yeah.
or whatever it is, or take care of myself. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is around, we talked about feelings, like naming my feelings. There was a time when people would ask me how I felt about something, and I'll be like, I don't know. Like, I just couldn't, I couldn't name it. I'm like, I don't know what I'm feeling, and like, I have really worked hard through therapy to like name what I'm feeling. And I know that sounds crazy, but I just don't have practice. And then when I name what I'm feeling, I try to find it in my body.
Yeah. I mean, we're teaching grownups we're teaching 50-year-old CEOs how to do this, and they pay us a lot of money per hour.
Right.
I mean, it sounds basic, but it is not. It is not a part of the culture. Like, people aren't teaching this stuff, and it's like core. Or it should be.
Yeah. So, I think there's one more thing that I want to talk about, and I know we're out of time, and that is
we have time. We have abundance of time, Stefan. You just spoke that up.
I don't have any. It's like level setting. This is the only way I can think about it. It's like resetting my meter for pain. And what I mean by that is, like, when you've gone through traumatic experiences, you're like, I've gone through X, Y, like, this is nothing. Or, or I've been in this type of relationship, this is nothing. And so it just ups and ups and ups. And we endure things that are not normal. We normalize situations that we should not. And so I've been really clear about bringing that down and listening to my body if I feel uncomfortable, or if there's a lot of intense emotions, or like really processing through that, and then figuring out what's acceptable to me and what's not. And if it's not acceptable, communicating that or letting it go, as opposed to enduring and being in abusive relationships. Because.
Well, you're making me think of that, I really haven't had the thought in this way before. Is like, we abuse ourselves first so often, right? Like, when we endure or normalize things that are so hard, then we're abusing ourselves. And to my point earlier, it's like, if all I've ever known is that kind of abuse, if nothing else was ever modeled for me, that's what I'm really seeing. Like, and Malcolm X, in the autobiography of Malcolm X, Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X are sitting at like a bar somewhere, like talking, probably not drinking alcohol because they're,
in the nation.
Muslim, they're in the nation or whatever of Islam. But he basically Elijah Muhammad tells Malcolm X, like, stop harping on what's not happening. And he uses this example. He says, you keep talking about everybody's dirty glass. He takes 2 glasses on the counter at the diner, and he's like, this is a dirty glass. You keep getting everybody to look at the dirty glass. He's like, if you put a clean glass, sit it right next to the dirty glass, you don't have to say anything. It's obvious that the clean glass is better. And so to me, like, that's a lot of also how I approach liberation, my own and others, is like, how do I help people see, feel, experience the clean glass? I don't have to argue with you about blah, 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 blah. But if X, Y, but if it is so normalized in our culture or collectively or in the majority, like these abusive situations, right? Or these things where we mistreat people and we don't have visions in our families or in our cultures of the clean glass, I do think it is very hard to move towards the clean glass. And like, I would be like I would say to you, like, where did you who pointed you to abundance? Was that a natural inclination? You just knew that? You sensed that? Did somebody hold a clean glass for you around abundance over scarcity? Like, how did you shift that if you came from a scarcity and you were surrounded by scarcity?
Mm-hmm. I think it's been a slow roll. I think it's been self-discovery. Like, I mean, it goes back to, I feel like, us reading A New Earth. Didn't you read The New Earth with me or tell me?
Yeah, me, you, and Jonathan did that. That
Yes.
is so old. That's my first. I wasn't on anything that I'm on now. And that was like 2007, 2008. I couldn't even, I remember I would read a page and my mind would hurt and I wouldn't understand half of what he was saying. And I would have to set it down and then pick it back up and read the page a couple more times. And I'm a good reader.
So that's just an example. It's like little inputs, along the way. I think therapy, and those, like, things have happened that have led me to this place. I think, honestly, what broke the camel's back is being a dad. I realized that my trauma was impacting my ability to connect with the people I love the most. And that if I did not address it, hey, I'm if I did not, right. And then here's Langston, my other kid. If I did not address it, that I would perpetuate trauma.
You were motivated. You were committed. Yeah, you were committed to not perpetuate trauma with them before you were ready to be committed to not perpetuate it for yourself.
Right, because I don't really know what that looked like. And then I'm like, oh shit, like, I mean, they're bringing it to my attention, or, like, it was just so crystal clear that I'm like, I gotta do something. And it wasn't until I was 36, Lauren, that I publicly said that I had been molested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
36 years old.
Sense to me. Yeah.
Do you know how many years that is of
hiding,
shame, and
guilt?
Yeah. Yes.
Secrecy, protecting other people.
Correct. So, and I think of myself like I'm so grateful to God that I have been able to thrive, in air quotes, because some people cannot. They were not able to manage it.
Right.
So it's like now I'm trying to catch up and really heal from the inside out.
Mm-hmm. What, well, this is kind of our last question. So it's where we take kind of our own healing and we step out and we look collectively, like what is, and we're just assuming this is all connected, but like, what do you believe about collective healing? So we've talked a lot about individual healing. What's needed for our collective healing? Where do we start?
For me, and just connecting it to our conversation, what's needed for collective healing is disrupting the trauma cycle by one, being honest, and then doing the work to heal. And in my instance, in my case, that has started with a lot of work around my body, how I feel, what do I need, like prioritizing me, so that I can show up better for those who I love. But it could look different for someone else. But I think in a lot of instances, people who have gone through different types of trauma, specifically sexual trauma, they hide or don't share, and it continues. And so in order for us to heal collectively, we're going to have to share those stories and begin the process of healing.
Makes me think a little bit about, well, I was actually re-listening to the episode we did with Jim Dethmer, and we talked a lot about sex and touch and the shadow side of all of it and the really high side of all of it. And yeah, it's like, I feel like we've been also scared of sexuality that we get more and more shadow side, and that is what perpetuates a lot of the abuse and the things that are happening. And it's like what you're saying about honesty and bringing things out into the light, and it's sort of like the antidote for shame, right? To sort of like share things. And I'm just wondering about how talking about sex more, talking about sexual energy more, like being more open, even though I think it feels scary, especially in like an organizational structure or things like that. But it's like, it's there. And when we repress it and pretend it's not there, like that's when it comes out sideways and in these ways that really like aren't of service, you know? And I just wonder what it looks like to create a world where we have more flow and less repression and maybe less abuse.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think about is, and Lauren touched on this a little bit earlier, is like, when I think about the offender, I also think about them as the victim. And for me, in my journey, it's not about, I feel sorry for that person, that they would carry out these actions, right? And to me, that's a part of the healing collectively.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking.
We're shifting the paradigm, like, wait, you're sick too. Like something has happened to you,
right?
And you need help, as opposed to
there's evil people and there's
you're evil and you're yes, this good and bad, right? And so yes, your actions were bad, but and so yeah, I think
that's also connected to
what love and acceptance.
And I'm thinking, it comes back to, I think there's a proactive piece to connect it back to this parenting conversation, is like, so old, in my opinion, old school parenting is like, this is what's right and this is what's wrong, and like get on the side of right. And if you do the wrong things, I'm going to shame or give consequences to you to then make you not do that again. Right. Which then creates this, right or wrong way. And this desire to always be on the good side of things and to think you should be, and perfectionism and all these pieces. Right. And so like that level of compassion really requires like less shame for our mistakes. Right. And less shame. And then we can actually have space for that in other people as well.
Right. And an understanding of the bigger issue. Because when I think of someone who, obviously there are people who are sick, but when I think of a kid, like when I was a principal, this happened all the time. I mean, unfortunately, all the time, you would hear of a kid being touched by a family member or another kid. The first thing in my mind I think of is someone's done that to that kid, right? It's not the kid's fault. And as opposed to villainizing the kid, the offender. And if we would take on more of like a holistic and healing thought approach, I think that there would be less shame around it, or definitely around the person who needs the help.
When I have a story, like I think that every generation has like a collective like gift.
Pain body. Gift.
Yeah, pain body and gift, which would be the shadow and the light, And I would say like the range of our particular age group, it feels very clear to me that ours is healing trauma and like healing our intergenerational trauma and all the things that requires. And I think that the generation before us was like kind of disruptive, like I think we would say we saw a lot of divorces in that generation, like that some of these structures, some of these things, like we're going to blow them up or we're not going to be that successful at them, so that this next generation can use that pain to heal and disrupt, 7 generations back of what has occurred. And when I got pregnant with Taylor, and I was so clear about that. It's like a huge part of my mission in my life became, I do not want him to have to learn the lessons that I've had, to learn. If I can complete some of these lessons so that he doesn't have to carry them like that, that's what I want to do. Which is what I hear you saying too, is your kids kind of seems like.
Yes.
Ignited that a little bit.
Completely.
Well, Stefan, it's been so great to have you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for sticking with me throughout these scheduling, these reschedules.
That's no problem. It's of service, I think.
Yes, it was a joy.
Well, the next time I'm in Chicago, I'm going to make Lauren hit you up on behalf of
me.
Maybe hang out.
We're going to have a good time.
All right. Well, it looks like Lauren's got to go take care of the stuff she's been in here.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you so much, Bethany. It was a pleasure to meet you and share space.
Thank you for sharing so much of yourself here. I think I think that these stories are really going to help other people a lot.
That's my prayer. That's my hope and prayer. So I'll talk to you soon.
Bye, Steve.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Hey, everybody. If you've got any feedback for us, we welcome it, or ideas about future guests, email us at healingcollectivepod@gmail.com. Our website is thehealingcollectivepodcast.com. We are at Healing Podcast on Twitter, and we are at Healing Collective Podcast on Instagram. Special thanks to Monda Creative, who edits all of our podcasts, and Two Tall Women Productions, who produce. Thank you.